You're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
If you or your patients struggle with muscle cramps, spasms, soreness, or restless leg syndrome, you're going to want to hear about our non-opioid TheraWorks Relief. TheraWorks Relief is a clinically proven and published locally acting topical solution that prevents and relieves muscle cramps, spasms, and soreness in the legs and feet. In a research study including patients diagnosed with restless leg syndrome, TheraWorks Relief was shown to reduce symptoms commonly associated with accompanying RLS, including muscle cramps and spasms. Muscle cramps are reported as a side effect of hundreds of prescription medications, from intravenous iron sucrose and conjugated estrogens to statins and diuretics. By managing muscle cramps, TheraWorks Relief supports adherence, helping patients stay on important and often life-saving medications. TheraWorks Relief comes in an easy-to-use, fast-absorbing, non-greasy foam that can prevent muscle cramps and spasms with just a few simple applications a day. To learn more about TheraWorks Relief, go to theraworksrelief.com and click on the Healthcare Professional link.
Welcome to the Nontraditional Pharmacist Podcast, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. The Nontraditional Pharmacist provides the pharmacist professional ideas to help you think outside the box. Pharmacy is evolving fast, and this podcast is all about the evolution of the pharmacist role in healthcare. And now, here is the Nontraditional Pharmacist team, Lynn, Matt, and Nick.
Lynn Paterini here with the Nontraditional Pharmacist, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Today we are focusing on pharmacy administration. Now this is a great career for pharmacists to go into, mainly because of how diverse of a field it is. There's many positions available for pharmacists. And you might be wondering, what is pharmacy administration? I actually came across a great article that was featured in APHA written by a Melissa Skelton. And she described pharmacy administration from a basic level that it provides leadership and support to practicing pharmacists in any setting. And as you can see, there's a lot of opportunities available. We've already explored one of those roles here on the Nontraditional Pharmacist with a great interview with Anthony Boyd, who was pharmacy inpatient manager at the Cleveland Clinic. And today we are going to dive deeper into pharmacy administration with Dr. Michael Kosal, who is Pharmacy Operations Manager at Ascension Genesys Hospital in Grand Blanc, Michigan. So Mike, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get started with, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background through pharmacy and how you got to your role in pharmacy administration?
So yeah, great place to start. My path through pharmacy actually started just with volunteering in a hospital pharmacy as a high school student. Spent time kind of looking at their operations and what they were doing. Found it really was something that I felt quite passionate about and I felt I could really make a difference with. So then progressing through undergrad and then grad school at the University of Michigan to get my doctorate of pharmacy. I then spent that time interning at the same hospital I initially volunteered. And as an intern, I was able to see that there were opportunities to blend not only operational excellence, but also clinical excellence. And I felt that was where I could make the most significant impact, was in helping everything run smoothly so that the care for our patients was as top-notch as possible. Looking at what I could do with that after graduation, administration was a natural draw. Looked at interfacing not only between our clinicians, but our patients, and then also the operational side of things to draw all of that together and connect those two parties. That's really what drove me in the direction and landed here.
Oh, that's great. So you knew from high school you were interested in pharmacy administration, or would you say you more locked it into when you got more interested in it as you got through pharmacy school?
I would say it was definitely an interest. It was always there. I felt it would have been a disservice to myself to just kind of go down one path. So all through pharmacy school, I was exploring the various avenues and options, several of which you guys have talked about even on this program. Things looking at a very clinical aspect of things, whether that was ICU specialty, cardiology focus, and even some experience in the ambulatory care setting. It was really kind of a desire to get a broad spectrum. And at the end of it, I still felt that administration was where I could really make a difference and where my passion truly lie.
Now, pharmacy administration is a pretty broad term. What would you say, being immersed in the field, how would you define pharmacy administration?
Now, there's a fun question. So pharmacy administration, like you said, even at the start of the broadcast here, really is a broad sweeping a title. I mean, that covers anything from a supervisor role all the way up to, chief pharmacy officers for several hospital health systems. And each one of those roles has a slightly different scope, but they all kind of focus on the same thing. And it was similar to what we were describing. It looks at the closer you are to the clinical side of things, you have more experience in those day-to-day activities. That might be, okay, how do we handle, what's our vancomycin dosing nomogram look like, or things along those lines? And how do you operationalize that? As you move further up that chain, progressing from, say, supervisor to manager to director and so on, you start to interface more with folks outside of the pharmacy department and looking at how does pharmacy interface with other specialties and groups in order to, I guess, unify all of healthcare, looking at budgeting, operations, department interface, and a little bit of that aspect of things. All the way up to, chief pharmacy officer, where you may be dictating an entire scope of pharmacy for up to, 10, 15 hospitals.
Wow, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity available then. You mentioned there is the clinical side of it with, you were saying, the vancomycin dosing, and you have to know, again, the clinical role. How about in terms of supervising and the financial aspect of it? Is there a lot of business involved? How did you get your business experience to do your job?
So I will say that's probably one of the biggest differences between a strictly clinical role and an administrative role. You have to marry those two subjects to an extent. Whereas a clinician is focused primarily on face-to-face care with a patient or day-to-day operations associated with the patient, the operations side and the administration side looks at, okay, our patients are still our primary focus, but how do we also make sure that we have the funds necessary to do what we're trying to do? How do we make sure that we have the equipment that we need to do our job? What do we need to do from a staffing standpoint, or what protocols need to be put in place so that our staff are able to effectively and efficiently tackle patient care? And that's really where you see administration shine. I always used to describe it to people as the triangle that sits right in between patients, business, and providers. Because if you don't take care of patients, you shouldn't be in the healthcare field. If you're not taking care of your providers, they're not going to be there to take care of patients. And if you're not keeping an eye on the financial side of things, well, you're not going to be able to keep your facility's doors open, and then you're not taking care of anybody. So I always looked at it as administration sits right in the center of that triangle, and it's their job to kind of keep all three of those things in balance.
So patients, business, and providers, that's great. Can you give us a description of your role, your day-to-day responsibilities of what you do? And, we can kind of work into how that fits into your personal life and how that, your work-life balance. But let's just start with your day-to-day responsibilities on the job.
So that is one of the other things I'll say is absolutely exciting about pharmacy administration. Your day-to-day is almost always guaranteed to change. There are certain things that you have to tackle every day. Do I have enough staff here today? Or, are our operations working the way they're supposed to? Are any of my machines not malfunctioning or not performing their job appropriately? What's going on in the hospital that I might need to address? Those are the things that you kind of ask yourself as a survey every day. What things do I need to triage and tackle, or are we working the way we're supposed to? But then in addition to that, you tackle various projects. Maybe you're trying to operationalize a new approach to a clinical problem, or perhaps you're looking at a cost-saving measure, and perhaps most people can ally with this. In the past year, we've been managing drug shortages at an unprecedented rate. So looking at how is your facility going to adapt and adjust when the drugs that you are normally expecting to have aren't available? How do you make sure that you're still doing what you can for patients and that your staff are armed and equipped with what they need in order to do their job? And so one of the, like I said, greatest advantages to pharmacy administration is that day-to-day looks a little different every day. So you're never bored. What you're working on Monday may be totally different than what you're working on Friday. And it really is, again, looking at all of those interfaces to see where am I most needed today, what work needs to happen.
Is there any particular part that you prefer or you like doing more than another?
I'll say I'm a little biased. I'm a numbers guy. I love looking at metrics and seeing, hey, last month we were here and we tried this tweak about, maybe we wanted to improve our turnover rate on, a particular drug agent, and then seeing how that work has impacted our performance the next month. We see that also in things like, are we hitting our budget goals? How many patients are we caring for? One of the current initiatives we're working on is CHF readmissions and trying to make sure that our patients are being counseled and educated so that they can avoid coming back to the hospital. And so we monitor and look at that kind of information. And which really, I guess, gets me psyched about my job is when I get to go in and say, hey, we tried making this change last month, and here's what we saw go well or maybe not well, and how do we adjust that? You'll hear a lot of people talk about the plan, do, check, adjust cycle. And that is, I would say, the bread and butter for pharmacy administration. It's, okay, what can we plan to do? What are we going to do? How do we check it? And then what adjustments do we need to make? And so I would say that's really what gets me excited is looking at how the little things that you do make a measurable difference.
Well, it sounds like you're really passionate about what you do, and it really fits your personality really well. And in terms of, you have your work life all set, how does that fit into your work-life balance? In terms of, do you work a lot of nights? With pharmacy, a common complaint is working on weekends. So how does that look like for you in pharmacy administration?
Great question. I mean, I know it's extremely important to most folks. And I would say there's a varied across the spectrum. As you're closer to a clinical role, maybe in a supervisor position or something along those lines, you do tend to see more of that off-hour requirement where you may be supervising a second or third shift type setup. However, as you move up that chain, you tend to see less of that and more of a shift towards the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday type positioning. The one aspect of pharmacy administration that often is kind of forgotten about with that is that you kind of need to be available to your staff. Things don't always happen between 9 and 5. So you may occasionally get the phone call at 9 p.m. Hey, something's really gone wrong and we need a little guidance here. Now you can build protocols and procedures in with those things, but it's a good idea and it really helps your staff feel connected to you if you're available to those folks. I would say that's a rarity, but it is something that kind of comes with the job. Now, so it really comes down to what people are looking for. Personally, I enjoy the schedule. It's nice to have the weekends off, but again, I'm always available to my staff. They all have my cell phone number. It's posted in our department, and there have been times that I've received a call at 3 a.m. asking, what do we do? I would say that's rare, but can happen.
Yeah, because ultimately, if you're a manager, you're responsible for how, the outcomes that are in the pharmacy and on your unit. But you said that's a very rare, that's not a common experience or occurrence, but you do have to be prepared for that to happen.
Absolutely. And like I said, one of the other really nice things about it is you can help empower your staff to address a lot of concerns. And that gets back to what we were talking about before, creating operational protocols and procedures and helping your staff understand what is it I can do to take care of an issue or a problem. Empowering your people in that manner not only makes them better practitioners and better clinicians, but can help your department run a little more smoothly, increasing their satisfaction and then also reducing the likelihood that you get that 3 a.m. phone call.
How would you say this role in pharmacy fulfills your personal and your professional goals? What is your ultimate goal with pharmacy administration?
Great question, Lynn. Thank you for asking related to how it looks at fits into my personal goals and professional growth. Realistically, I've always kind of had that feeling that pharmacy needed someone to connect the components. As we discussed before, I see that as the patients we're caring for, the people who are providing the care, and then the business and operational side of pharmacy. So professionally, being able to sit in that position and help unify those things makes a world of difference. For the past 10, 15, 20 years, we've heard patients first. And I think a lot of that causes people to focus just on the patients. And I've always felt that a key component of caring for patients is caring for the people who care for patients. So, our providers, our staff. And it's just as important to keep a focus on those folks and make sure that they're empowered and they have the tools they need so that they can provide that top quality care. Oftentimes I find that that's my job, is to take care of our people and help them do that. So from that standpoint, it's very satisfying to me personally to see the difference I can make in the lives of my associates, whether that's helping them with scheduling or arranging some coverage when they have an emergency or arise, or even allowing them to learn new things and to put that extra knowledge into practice. To me, that's extremely satisfying. Personally, I enjoy what I do. And I think it's for someone who's looking to kind of pull all the pieces together, it's a great opportunity.
That's a great point that you just made with, the behind the scenes is just as important as the face-to-face interaction with the pharmacist, with the patients, excuse me. So, that's a great, something that we don't really think about, what goes on behind the scenes to for pharmacists to even do what they're able to do and help patients. You mentioned a little bit about other roles in pharmacy administration. Could you go into that a little bit more in terms of, we have your role as operations manager. What are some of the other positions that are involved in administration?
Yeah. So, because as you highlighted earlier in this discussion, they're they're widely varied. You have everything from a supervisor, and that can be either just a generic supervisor, it can be a very specialized supervisor, it may be a technician supervisor or sterile compounding supervisor. Supervisor tends to be your first introductory level into pharmacy administration. Usually above that, you'll have assistant managers. And again, those can be either very generic or very specialized. It usually is associated with the size of the health system. Larger health systems tend to require more specialization in their pharmacy administration team versus a smaller 200, 300 bed hospital may only have an assistant manager and a manager. You may not have the supervisor role. Moving up from assistant managers, you tend to hit your manager standpoint. And managers are also varied. You can have folks who fall into my position, which would be operations management. You can have clinical managers. And with that, you can also just have a generic manager who's responsible for it all. It really usually depends on the size of the health system and how specialized they want to get with their folks. Above that, you tend to have either assistant directors or directors. Depends again on the size of the health system. And those folks are where you start kind of seeing more of the budgetary interfacing. How are we going to fit into the whole hospital picture? And then above that, oftentimes you'll have either directors over an entire health system or chief pharmacy officers or vice presidents of pharmacy. The titles tend to vary, but it's usually about a 4-step or a 5-step process from supervisor to assistant manager to manager to director to top of the ladder. Again, that varies with the health system, but overall that tends to be the overarching structure. As you go, like kind of what we said throughout this presentation, starting from the supervisor role, you're much closer to clinical activities. It's where your focus tends to be is more on the day-to-day clinical plus a sprinkling of administration. As you move up slightly into, assistant manager role, you tend to be more concerned with the entire operation of the department or the clinical initiatives of the entire department. You move to that director role, it tends to be how does the department fit inside the hospital? And then as you move up to a vice president or a chief pharmacy officer role, it tends to be how does the pharmacy or all of the pharmacies fit into the whole health system? And that tends to be kind of how you see the scope increase.
What does the pharmacy administration landscape look like today, and how do you think it'll change in the future? I know you just mentioned it can depend on the size of the health system, but can you just give us a little bit of insight into how it is now versus the future?
So I will say now there is certainly opportunity in pharmacy administration, and I would expect that to continue into the future. We've noticed that pharmacy schools tend to put a very high focus on clinical attentions and training pharmacists to be great clinicians, which I think is excellent. But oftentimes we miss that at some point there needs to be leaders of those clinicians. And I don't know that a lot of pharmacy schools do an excellent job of that. There are some that are certainly starting to. But as I see the landscape right now, we see a lot of open leadership positions. And I expect that will continue, especially with changes in the healthcare landscape. We are starting to see more health system type structuring. We're seeing fewer and fewer single entity hospitals. As we start to conglomerate hospitals together, there will be need for that pharmacy structure to kind of unify the work those folks are doing. And that's where I think we'll see opportunities for pharmacy administration folks or people interested in pursuing those leadership roles outside of just frontline clinical work.
Yeah, leadership experience is definitely a key component to being a manager. What advice would you give to pharmacy students and pharmacists that are looking to pursue a career in pharmacy administration?
I think the biggest part is cultivate a passion for learning. We already know we have to do that as clinicians. You're learning about any new agents that are hitting the market, new protocols, new procedures, new guidelines. But it's essentially important to do that even as you transition into administration. If you're responsible for leading your staff, you need to an extent, know what they know or know how to get the information that they have. That helps you liaison and interface with those folks. So it's truly cultivate a passion for learning. Read incessantly. Because what you will pick up from reading are either new ways to help your staff, new ideas about how to operate your department. And don't be afraid to read outside of pharmacy. My bookshelf is littered with things ranging from how to lead people to how to persuade to how to negotiate. I can't stress enough the importance of reading a newspaper. Personally, I read a newspaper every day. I look at specifically the business section because that's an important part of our world. And as healthcare becomes more and more business driven, we look at changes in CMS. Educating yourself and being aware of what's happening in the landscape will be vital. So for folks interested in pursuing a career in leadership, there's no such thing as a leadership role that's too small. And sure, you don't necessarily have to have a title to be a leader. Grow and focus on how you interact with people, because ultimately being a leader is just that. It's convincing people to get on board with you in the direction that you're headed. That is what being a leader is. So interfacing with folks, expanding a network of friends, those are all key things that provide great practice for becoming a leader. So if I had to sum it up into 3 things, it's cultivate a passion for learning. Don't be afraid to get out there and try something. There's nothing that's considered too small of a leadership position. And 3, read.
That's great. It's definitely important to be aware of what's going on in the world. I know with pharmacy, we tend to get very focused and specialized on the most up-to-date treatments that are available, but you have to remember what's going on in the world and to stay up to date with the news so you can help shape healthcare of the future. Where would people go to learn more?
They always say pharmacy is a very small community. For folks interested in pharmacy administration, I would try to reach out either through a school of pharmacy or through a local hospital or place that you may be already employed and working. Try to shadow, get some opportunities to see what that looks like, find out if that's really where your passion is. And if that is something that you're interested in, ask to do a little more, ask to take on a project to help out. I will say that's where I got my start. I was an intern and I noticed an opportunity to improve some operational components of what we did. Said, hey, can I give this a try? And my manager at the time said, sure, go ahead. Let's see what you come up with. And that, definitely got me excited, and it was an opportunity to put that to use. So I would say, don't be afraid to ask someone who's in a position that if you can kind of see what they're doing. Outside of that, there are limited resources in pharmacy administration. We're starting to see more pharmacy residencies pop up geared towards administration. So you can certainly reach out to those folks. But overall, the best experience is almost seeing someone who's doing the job, because it is different than really anything most places are teaching.
Networking, it's a key component in pharmacy, right?
Absolutely.
This is a question we love asking all of our guests here. Where do you think the future of the pharmacy profession in general is going?
Well, there's a very interesting question. Given the way we're seeing healthcare change and the fact that so much from CMS guidelines and things along those are changing so much, we're starting to see our population get significantly older, and we're starting to see our population get much sicker. If you compare even the difference between 1970 and now, the average cost to take care of a patient over the age of 70, I think, has almost doubled. And then you pair the fact that the number of people who are getting to the age of 70 is also increasing. With that, we know it's going to cost more to provide healthcare as we currently do it. And to figure out where those dollars are going to come from is challenging. I think a big change for healthcare is going to be, we'll see less hospital focus and more health system focus, where it'll become, how is a patient moved from community health services to perhaps a clinic to perhaps a secondary care facility, only then making it to a tertiary care facility like a hospital. Right now, I think we kind of skip that process a bit, and we see a lot of patients go from, hey, I don't feel well, to I'm in a hospital ED. And I think there's real opportunity to expand our services, not only from pharmacy and healthcare in general, across that spectrum. How do we keep people from getting sick rather than seeing them only when they're at their sickest? And I think that will be a huge component in healthcare as it changes in the next coming 10 to 20 years. I think it will be hospital administration or even health system administration's role to say, how can we move our people in the directions that we want, so that we have those folks interfacing with patients at every step of that process, not only at their sickest.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And that, pharmacy needs to look into preventative care rather than just just treating them once they get to that disease state. So definitely agree with that. Well, there you have it. A great look into another role in pharmacy administration. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show with us today and sharing your story.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
This is Lynn Paterini with the Nontraditional Pharmacist, and we will see you next time.